The soil of the Mississippi River Delta in Louisiana holds secrets deeper than its rich black earth. In the autumn of 1852, a property deed was filed that defied every law of the antebellum South. Moses, a man born into slavery on Bellerive Plantation, became the legal owner of that very plantation just 8 months after his master's death. The audacity didn't stop there. 40 days after the funeral, Moses married his former master's widow, Celeste, a white woman from a respected Creole family. The parish clerk recording the marriage license wrote in the margin, "God have mercy on us all." Within Moses's first year of freedom, 6 people who questioned his rapid rise to power died under suspicious circumstances. His former master, Henri Beauchamp, was found dead with a rifle, ruled a suicide despite contradictions in the sealed coroner's report. By 1853, Moses Beauchamp, the name he adopted after marrying Celeste, controlled one of the wealthiest estates in Ascension Parish. The terrifying question was, and remains, how many people died to make this impossible transformation possible? Before we continue with the story of Moses and the blood-soaked path that led from slave quarters to plantation master, I want to hear from you. Subscribe to The Forgotten Liturgy if you're fascinated by the darkest chapters of American history, and leave a comment telling me what state or city you're listening from. This is a story that was deliberately buried for generations, and your engagement helps bring these forgotten truths to light. Bel-Air Plantation, spanning 800 acres of prime sugarcane land, was inherited by Henri Beauchamp in 1838. Henri was calculating, ambitious, and by 1850 had paid off his debts and expanded his slave holdings. His success was largely due to his willingness to observe and learn from his enslaved people, especially Moses. Moses, born on Bel-Air in 1822, was a figure of unsettling intelligence. He taught himself to read, mastered carpentry, and understood the complex economics of sugar production better than most overseers. Most remarkably, he possessed an almost preternatural ability to read people, sensing their fears, desires, and weaknesses. Henri recognized this talent and made the dangerous decision to promote Moses, first as a driver, then as a mill operator, and eventually as his personal assistant, giving him access to the estate's business affairs and unprecedented influence. Henri's wife, Celeste, arrived in 1845. She was the young, beautiful daughter of a declining Creole family, married off to the older Henri as a solution to her father's gambling debts. She brought refinement but no affection for her husband. Despite the rigid social structure, Moses wielded more influence than the white overseers, Tobias, and Samuel Greenleaf, who deeply resented that Henri relied on Moses's judgment because Moses simply made Henri more money. By the spring of 1852, Bel-Air was thriving on the surface, hosting the parish elite. Henri passionately defended the Southern way of life, often using insights Moses had shared with him earlier that day. But beneath this surface, tensions were building. Moses had spent 3 decades watching, learning, and waiting. He understood the plantation's operations and its vulnerabilities better than Henri himself. The entire structure of Bel-Air rested on Henri Beauchamp's authority, and that authority, in turn, rested on nothing more substantial than tradition. Moses was prepared to remove that foundation. The summer of 1852 would reveal just how fragile Bel-Air's foundation truly was. The evening of June 17, 1852, began like countless others. Henri Beauchamp had spent the oppressive day reviewing account books with Moses in his second-floor study. Celeste remained in her chambers with a claimed headache, attended by Margot, a frequent retreat that drew murmurs from the household staff. Around 7 p.m., Henri dismissed Moses and called for his evening meal, cold chicken, bread, cheese, and his preferred claret, which Margot carried upstairs and left just inside the study door. What followed was pieced together from fractured testimony. At approximately 9:30 p.m., Overseer Tobias Greenleaf saw lamplight still burning in the study. Sometime between 9:30 and 11 p.m., someone entered the study, though the door had been locked from the inside. At 11:45 p.m., Louisa, the house manager, was awakened by a sound she described as something heavy falling. She found the study door slightly ajar and pushed it open, revealing Henri Beauchamp slumped in his chair, his hunting rifle across his lap, and blood on the wall behind him. The scene appeared to be suicide, the rifle, which Henri kept mounted above his desk, placed beneath his chin. Tobias Greenleaf immediately assumed command, ordered everyone out, and called for Dr. Matthias Fentress. The doctor arrived after 1 a.m., confirmed the obvious cause of death, and initially concluded suicide in his notes. However, Dr. Fentress observed several details that troubled him enough to include them in a separate, sealed report. Henry's hands showed no powder residue beyond handling the rifle. The weapon was found across his lap in an awkward position. A bottle of claret was nearly empty, though Henri was a moderate drinker. And most disturbingly, Henri's face bore an expression of profound surprise mixed with recognition, as if he had understood something in his final moment. The household descended into controlled chaos. Celeste became hysterical, requiring laudanum. Moses took charge of practical arrangements, sending for Henry's brother Armand, notifying the priest, and organizing the staff. With a calm efficiency that first raised suspicions in Tobias Greenleaf's mind. Moses showed no visible distress, giving orders as if he had anticipated this moment. When Greenleaf mentioned this to his brother, Samuel's response was sharp. "How long do you think Moses has been waiting for this?" The official investigation quickly concluded that Henri had taken his own life while intoxicated and despondent over financial troubles. This verdict satisfied legal requirements and preserved the family's reputation, yet several people found it difficult to accept. Greenleaf, who insisted Henri was enthusiastic about business, Henri's brother Armand, who verified the healthy finances, and Louisa, who knew Henri would never abandon his responsibilities. Despite the doubts, the inquiry was closed. Henri's body was placed in the Plantation's ice house, and the funeral was scheduled for 5 days later. During that time, Belair existed in a strange state of suspension. Everyone understood that a fundamental change was coming. Armand had legal authority, Celeste was the widow, and the Greenleaf brothers assumed they would gain control, but all needed someone with legal standing to sign orders. Moses continued managing daily operations as he had under Henri, and everyone, including Henri's brother Armand, accepted this arrangement because the alternative was chaos. He reviewed accounts with Armand, handled contracts with the New Orleans factor, and made critical planting decisions. He did all this with the same calm competence, and people began to forget that his legal status had not changed. He was still enslaved, and every decision he made had no legal authority whatsoever. On June 21st, the evening before Henri's funeral, Moses requested a private meeting with Celeste in the small parlor. Margot, positioned outside, could not hear the discussion, which lasted 45 minutes. Moses emerged, revealing nothing. 10 minutes later, Celeste emerged, looking both terrified and relieved, as if she had made a definitive decision. The funeral passed, and Armand Beauchamp departed immediately, leaving the plantation as management under current arrangements. A vague instruction that Greenleaf understood to mean accepting Moses' continued authority, which only intensified his resentment. That evening, as Louisa cleaned Henri's study, she noticed the hunting rifle that killed him was back in its place above the desk. She was certain Sheriff Théot had taken it as evidence. Moses's explanation, that Armand had arranged its return, was reasonable, but left Louisa profoundly uneasy. Another detail surfaced when Margot noticed Celeste wearing an old-fashioned gold locket, a piece she claimed belonged to her grandmother. Margot couldn't have known that inside the locket was a curl of dark hair and a folded paper containing 7 words written in Moses' hand: "What we have begun cannot be undone." The weeks following Henri's death revealed deep fractures in Belair's social structure. Moses continued to run the plantation efficiently, no longer seeking approval for his decisions, simply acting. The momentum of habit and the absence of a clear alternative authority meant his actions were accepted as legitimate. Celeste remained secluded but began meeting with Moses with increasing frequency and decreasing pretense of propriety. They met in the parlor, the former study, and on the gallery, speaking in low voices, sometimes in French, reviewing documents covered with legal language. Louisa noted shifts in the household operations as Celeste began making decisions about provisions and servants, matters widows typically left to male relatives. Her decisions, however, were always delivered through Moses. The Greenleaf brothers were being undermined but struggled to articulate how, as Moses gave them no direct orders, instead simply informing them of changes. When they protested, Moses referred them to Celeste, who confirmed the changes. When they questioned Celeste's legal authority, Moses pointed out the estate was in probate and Armand had ordered current arrangements to continue. Tobias Greenleaf became convinced Moses was manipulating Celeste, sharing his suspicions with Sheriff Teot. The sheriff listened politely but warned that suspicion was not evidence and that making unfounded accusations about a white woman's honor could have severe legal consequences. The simmering tension exploded on August 3rd when Moses arranged a profitable sale of sugar to a New Orleans factor. Greenleaf challenged the transaction, arguing Moses had no authority to negotiate. Moses calmly explained that he had negotiated the deal on Celeste's behalf with her full knowledge and approval, and the contract was already signed and the first payment received. The confrontation finally boiled over when Tobias Greenleaf, his frustration exploding, made the mistake of explicitly stating what many had been thinking. "You forget your place, Moses. You forget what you are." The scene took place in the mill office with half a dozen witnesses present. Moses's response was quiet, measured, and devastatingly precise. He invoked the authority of Celeste and the arrangements of Armand Beauchamp, effectively trapping Greenleaf. Challenging Moses meant challenging the mistress, and challenging the mistress meant admitting he had lost control of the plantation. 2 days later, Tobias Greenleaf fell suddenly ill with severe intestinal distress, diagnosed by Dr. Fentress as cholera. The illness progressed rapidly and proved fatal within 48 hours. Greenleaf died on August 7, 1852, 3 days after his confrontation with Moses. Though cholera was common, Dr. Fentress noted the unusual speed and severity of the decline. Samuel Greenleaf was suddenly elevated to sole overseer, but he lacked his brother's resolve. Moses approached him with a proposal to restructure the overseer's responsibilities, giving Samuel authority over field operations while Moses retained control of business affairs, contracts, and financial management. Samuel agreed, failing to realize until too late that he had just accepted a subordinate position. Moses had accomplished a complete inversion of the normal hierarchy, relegating the white overseer to supervising manual labor while an enslaved man controlled the money and contracts. Throughout these developments, old Jack, the kitchen manager, watched with increasing alarm. He recognized that this was not evolution, but a revolution conducted so gradually that most people did not recognize it. Jack noted that 3 house servants were reassigned to field work. 2 field workers loyal to the Greenleafs were sold to a neighboring plantation, and the butler was dismissed. All moves Moses explained as necessary, but which eliminated people who might observe or interfere. When Jack shared his observations with Louisa, she responded with profound fear. "Do not speak of these things. The only safety is in not noticing them." On September 12, 1852, exactly 12 weeks after Henry's death, Moses appeared before Justice Boudreau in the parish seat, accompanied by Celeste and a New Orleans lawyer. They presented 3 critical documents: Henri's revised will, a power of attorney for Celeste, and a manumission paper for Moses, signed by Henri and dated April 15, 1852. The manumission paper, granting Moses immediate freedom for his invaluable contributions, had never been filed as required by law. Moses's lawyer argued that the failure to file was a mere administrative oversight that should not invalidate Henri's explicit wish. Justice Boudreau, though understanding the situation violated every norm of Louisiana society, was faced with technically legal, properly executed documents. After considerable deliberation, he accepted the documents for filing. He approved the manumission, granted Celeste the requested authority, and entered the will into probate. Justice Boudreau, haunted by his decision to approve the manumission, wrote in his private journal, "I have today performed an act that may haunt me for the rest of my life. I have set in motion events that I suspect will not end well." The news of Moses's freedom spread through Ascension Parish, eliciting outrage and a kind of fascinated horror. Neighboring planters began avoiding Belair as if it were contaminated. Even the parish priest, Father LeBlanc, urged Celeste to consider the consequences of her choices. Samuel Greenleaf immediately resigned, stating he could not work under such circumstances. Moses accepted his resignation politely and swiftly hired a new overseer, Amos Pritchett, who was either ignorant of or indifferent to the plantation's unconventional arrangement. Through all this, Moses maintained his same calm demeanor, conducting business and managing operations with unfailing courtesy, but with one monumental difference. He now did it as a free man. The parish whispered the question: how had Moses achieved this impossible transformation? Most assumed coercion, but those who observed closely suspected something far more complex. That Moses had spent his life preparing for this moment, positioning himself as the only person who could hold the estate together after Henri's death. Beneath this suspicion lay a more terrifying question. Had Henri Beauchamp really taken his own life? The convenience of the suicide verdict, the speedy return of the rifle, and the sudden death of Tobias Greenleaf after challenging Moses, all pointed towards a deeper, darker implication that most preferred not to voice. The plantation's isolation deepened in the autumn of 1852, but its profitability did not falter under Moses's competent management. The social isolation, however, was about to be cemented by a scandalous act. On November 28, 1852, Celeste Beauchamp and Moses appeared at the parish clerk's office to file an application for a marriage license. Clerk Prosper Gauthier was initially stunned, but Moses, having consulted New Orleans lawyers, was prepared. He pointed out with careful precision that legally he was now a free man of color, and no law specifically prohibited the marriage. After 3 hours of discussion, Gauthier was forced to accept the application. The wedding, conducted by a defrocked alcoholic priest named Father Mature Corbeau, took place on December 19, 1852, in Belaire's parlor. When pronounced husband and wife, Moses placed a gold ring on Celeste's trembling finger. By marrying Celeste, Moses gained legal control of her inheritance from Henri, effectively making him the owner of Belaire Plantation. The parish elite reacted with fury and settled on complete social and economic isolation. But Moses had anticipated this, relying on his New Orleans factor, Joachim Tessier, who prioritized profit over propriety and had connections to northern buyers. Belaire began operating in isolation from its neighbors but was connected to commercial networks beyond the parish. Celeste remained pale, thin, and emotionally withdrawn, but Margot observed that she seemed relieved by her new situation. Moses bore all responsibility, and Celeste existed in a state of passive acceptance. During the first months of 1853, incidents suggested Moses was actively removing potential threats. In February, a field worker named Josiah, who claimed to have information about Henri's death, disappeared and was reported as a runaway. In March, old Jack, who had observed the changes with alarm, became ill with symptoms similar to those that had killed Tobias Greenleaf: severe intestinal distress, rapid decline, and death within days. Samuel Greenleaf, convinced Moses had murdered Henri, began collecting testimony from Belaire's former servants. On April 12, 1853, Samuel was found dead in his rented room. The official cause was apoplexy, or sudden heart failure, despite him being only 38 with no health history. All his notes had vanished. Dr. Fentress noted this was the fourth sudden death connected to Belaire in less than a year. Before the doctor could meet with the sheriff, Moses visited him. They spoke for 2 hours, after which Moses made a statement the doctor would never forget. Sometimes people die for reasons that are perfectly natural but appear suspicious to those who don't understand the complexity of human mortality. It would be unfortunate if such misunderstandings led a respected physician to make accusations he could not substantiate. The implication was clear. Dr. Fentress canceled his meeting with the sheriff and chose cowardice over courage. By summer 1853, Moses had achieved the impossible. From enslaved property to legal owner of one of the most valuable plantations in 13 months. The winter of 1853-1854 brought external threats. In March 1854, a serious challenge emerged when New Orleans lawyer Philippe Dufresne challenged Henri's will on behalf of distant French relatives. The legal battle began, but it was accompanied by violence. An arson attack destroyed a barn at Belaire, and Moses was shot at while riding along the plantation road. The most significant threat came from Margot, Celeste's maid, who approached Father Leblanc in June 1854, claiming to have evidence, intimate conspiratorial letters between Moses and Celeste that predated Henri's death. The letters confirmed their shared plans. Father Leblanc wrote to the bishop, but his letter was intercepted. On the night of June 23rd, The priest was found unconscious on the road, having seemingly been thrown from his horse. He died 3 days later. Margot, understanding what had happened, fled with the hidden documents towards New Orleans, but was detained by a patrol and suffered fatal injuries in the struggle. Her documents were lost and no investigation was conducted. In August, the lawsuit reached a critical phase. The night before depositions were scheduled, Philippe Dufresne was severely beaten and robbed of all his legal papers in his hotel room. Dufresne survived with permanent injuries, and the lawsuit collapsed. Moses had won again, but the attack made it clear. Moses was willing to kill anyone who threatened his position. Planters, led by Colonel Augustin Chevalier, formed an assassination committee to eliminate Moses. Moses, learning of the plot within 48 hours, hired New Orleans guards and turned Bel-Air into a fortress, varying his routines. In December 1854, Lucien Broussard, one of the 3 men on the committee, was found dead from a shotgun blast, officially a hunting accident. Colonel Chevalier survived 3 more weeks before dying in January 1855, officially from pneumonia, though his symptoms resembled the intestinal illness that had killed others. By early 1855, Moses had eliminated or driven away every active threat. This victory came at a cost. Bel-Air existed in complete social isolation. Moses had what he wanted: power, property, and freedom, but he was living in a prison of his own making. By spring 1859, the isolation had taken its toll. Celeste's mental state had deteriorated dramatically, and she moved through the house like a ghost. In May 1859, Louisa died peacefully. She left behind a sealed letter addressed to Dr. Fentress, containing her comprehensive narrative of everything she had witnessed: the mysterious meetings, the suspicious deaths, and Moses's transformation through calculated murder. Dr. Fentress, facing the decision that had haunted him for years, made a copy, sealed the original with his lawyer, and planned for the truth to emerge after his death. By summer 1859, Moses seemed to have lost interest in eliminating threats. In August 1859, Moses announced a decision that mystified all observers. He would free every enslaved person remaining on the plantation. Immediate and complete freedom for 73 people. The economic engine of Bel-Air was the slave labor force, and this act made continued operation impossible. Moses had realized that continuing to operate as a slave plantation made him complicit in the same system that had enslaved him. Freeing the people he owned was an attempt to break that cycle to prove his transformation meant more than mere role reversal. By October, he had essentially dismantled the economic engine that had made Bel-Air valuable. Coincidentally, Celeste's condition reached a crisis. In September, she stopped eating, found by Dr. Fentress in a state of profound physical and mental collapse. Celeste died on October 17, 1859, 7 years and 4 months after Henry's death. The official cause was wasting disease and melancholia. Moses, the sole owner of Bel-Air, had finally achieved absolute control and discovered it meant nothing to him. In November, he began selling off the plantation piece by piece: the mill, land, equipment, and livestock. By December 28, 1859, only the main house remained. Moses summoned Dr. Fentress, and in Henry's study, he poured brandy and began to speak. Moses did not confess to murder, but he spoke about the nature of power and its cost. He spoke about slavery and freedom, and about how both involved forms of control. He spoke of Celeste, acknowledging that their relationship and their plans to escape had begun years before Henri's death. He acknowledged that many obstacles were removed and necessary actions were taken. Most disturbing was his regret, not a moral regret for the people killed, but a practical regret that his methods had isolated him so completely that his victory became indistinguishable from defeat. He had achieved an impossible transformation, but created a life that satisfied him less than the one he had escaped. At the end, Moses asked Dr. Fentress, "If you could know with absolute certainty that a terrible injustice would be corrected through terrible methods, would you accept that bargain? Would you sacrifice others, many others, to achieve something that should never have been denied to you?" Dr. Fentress replied that he did not know. Moses smiled, saying, "That is the correct answer. Anyone who answers confidently does not understand the question." That was the last time Dr. Fentress saw Moses Beauchamp. On January 12, 1860, Moses disappeared from Belair, taking his accumulated wealth and leaving no indication of where he was going. The story of Moses Beauchamp became a dark legend. The truth, preserved in documents discovered decades later, was more complex. Dr. Fentress's journal, found after his death in 1871, and Louise's sealed letter provided a comprehensive narrative. Moses had been responsible for numerous deaths with Celeste's aid, but these documents also revealed that Moses had been shaped by a system that treated human beings as property and denied people agency based on race, creating conditions where the only path to the life he desired was through violence. The system had created Moses Beauchamp by denying him every legitimate avenue. In 1903, letters emerged suggesting Moses survived for at least 37 years after disappearing, living successfully under a different name, Maurice Beaumont, and even passing as white. In a letter dated 1889, the client, signing only as MB, wrote, "I traded their lives for my freedom, and I cannot determine whether this was justice or crime, revolution or murder. The system that enslaved me created the monster who destroyed that system from within. If I am guilty, then slavery itself stands guilty of creating me." The main house was demolished in 1887. The land was subdivided and sold. The cemetery where Henri and Celeste were buried was restored, but no stone marked Moses's grave. The story leaves us with uncomfortable questions. Was Moses Beauchamp a hero or a villain? Was his transformation liberation or crime? Were his methods justified by the impossibility of achieving freedom through legitimate means, or do they damn him regardless? The questions remain relevant because the conditions that created Moses, systems that deny people agency and force individuals to choose between submission and violence, have never fully disappeared. And wherever those dynamics exist, there will be individuals like Moses, brilliant and ruthless, who refuse to accept their assigned position and are willing to pay any price to transform themselves. What do you think of this story? Do you believe Moses Beauchamp was justified in his actions? Or do his methods make him irredeemable? Could he have achieved freedom through other means? Or did the system leave him no choice but violence? Leave your comment below and share your thoughts on this dark chapter of Louisiana history. If you enjoyed this tale and want more stories exploring the shadows of America's past, subscribe to The Forgotten Liturgy, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who appreciates history's uncomfortable truths.